The grand halls of the Xiferan royal palace were silent, yet tension filled the air. At the center of the chamber, Princess Silera stood tall, her violet skin glowing under the soft lights. Her sharp golden eyes were fixed on the human standing before her. Commander Ethan Drake remained calm, his posture straight, but his sharp gaze met hers without fear. Silara's voice was cold. "You expect me to bond with a human?" The Council of Xiferan elders watched in silence. This was no ordinary meeting. It was a desperate attempt to secure peace between the Xiferan Empire and the United Earth Federation. For centuries, the two species had been locked in a brutal war, but now the fighting had reached a point where neither side could afford to continue. The proposed solution: a bonding ceremony, a sacred Xiferan ritual that would link two souls permanently. Such a bond had never been attempted between a human and a Xiferan before. Ethan sighed. "Trust me, Princess. This wasn't my idea either." Silara's hands clenched into fists. She hated this. A warrior princess, trained in battle, now reduced to some political tool. But she was not foolish. She knew her people were losing the war. The Xiferans were strong, powerful, and had superior technology. But humans, they were different, unpredictable, dangerous, resilient. And now she was being asked to bond with one. Ethan, on the other hand, had his own reasons for being here. The Federation wanted peace, but they also wanted to understand the Xiferans better. If this bond worked, it could change everything. Still, he wasn't happy about it. Bonding wasn't just a contract. It was a deep, emotional, and mental connection. If it went wrong, it could destroy both of them. Silera stepped closer, studying him. Humans were strange creatures, smaller than Xiferans, but carrying an unshakable presence. Unlike Xiferans, who were raised with strict discipline, humans were wild, driven by emotion, yet somehow always in control. "You're not afraid?" she asked, tilting her head. Ethan smirked. "Should I be?" Silera scoffed. "The bond is not a simple agreement, human. It will merge our minds, our emotions. Once formed, it cannot be broken. If you are weak, it will destroy you." "Then I guess I better not be weak." She was taken aback by his confidence. No hesitation, no fear. Most Xiferan warriors would have flinched under her gaze, but this human stood firm. What kind of species was this? Before she could respond, the head elder, Chancellor Voris, stepped forward. His deep voice echoed in the chamber. "It is decided. The bonding ritual will commence at dawn. Both of you must prepare." Silera turned sharply. "Elder, I." Voris raised a hand. "This is not up for debate, Princess. The fate of our people depends on this." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Guess we're doing this, huh?" Silara's jaw tightened, but she gave a stiff nod. It seemed so. Hours later, the night before the bonding, Silera stood on the balcony of her palace quarters, staring at the twin moons of her homeworld. The wind was cold against her skin, but her thoughts burned hotter than fire. A human. Of all creatures, why a human? She had spent her entire life training to be a leader, a warrior. She had fought against humans in battle, seen their ruthlessness, their unwillingness to surrender. And yet, despite everything, she had to admit one truth: humans never gave up. That was why the war had lasted so long. Technology, strength, strategy, none of it could break human willpower. And now she was about to be bonded to one. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You look like you're thinking too hard." She turned. Ethan stood near the doorway, arms crossed. His uniform was slightly undone, and there was a relaxed confidence in his stance, like he belonged here. It annoyed her. "I do not require your company, human," she said coldly. Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, well, neither of us has a choice in this." He stepped forward. "Look, I get it. You don't want this. Neither do I. But if we're gonna do this, we might as well try not to hate each other." Zilara narrowed her eyes. You think this is about hatred, isn't it? For a long moment, she didn't respond. Finally, she turned back to the night sky. No, it's about survival. Ethan nodded slowly. That's something humans understand pretty well. She glanced at him, searching for sarcasm, but found none. He meant it. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of what made humans so different. They stood in silence, two warriors from opposite worlds, bound by fate. Tomorrow, everything would change, and neither of them was ready for it. The first rays of the twin suns spilled over the Zephyrin capital, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. Deep within the royal sanctuary, where only the most sacred ceremonies were held, Commander Ethan Drake stood in the center of a massive stone chamber. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, pulsating with energy. In front of him, Princess Zilara stood motionless, her golden eyes unreadable. High above, the Zephyrin High Council watched from their elevated seats. Chancellor Voris, leader of the elders, raised his staff, and the chamber fell into complete silence. The time has come, Voris announced. His deep voice echoed through the hall. Today, a bond shall be formed between two warriors of different worlds, the first of its kind. Let the ritual begin. Zilara took a slow breath, forcing her expression to remain calm. She had spent the night preparing for this, but her mind still struggled to accept it. A Zephyrin warrior, bound to a human. It was madness. Yet there was no turning back. Ethan, on the other hand, stood tall, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the princess. His military training had taught him to control his emotions, but deep inside, he felt something strange. Nervousness, curiosity, or maybe something more. A Zephyrin priestess, draped in flowing silver robes, approached them, holding an ornate golden chalice. She bowed slightly. The bonding requires the exchange of essence, she explained, her voice calm. Ethan arched an eyebrow. Exchange of essence? That sounds dramatic. Zilara shot him a sharp glare. This is a sacred ritual, human. Show respect. The priestess held up the chalice. Drink, and the bond will begin. Zilara took the chalice first, hesitating only for a moment before sipping the thick, glowing liquid inside. It burned as it traveled down her throat, sending a strange warmth through her veins. She passed the chalice to Ethan. He eyed the shimmering liquid. Well, here goes nothing. He took a deep sip, and immediately, a wave of heat surged through his body. His vision blurred, his mind spinning as if something ancient and powerful had just latched onto his soul. The chamber shook. The symbols on the walls flared with energy. The air crackled with unseen forces. Ethan stumbled back, gripping his head. A flood of emotions rushed into his mind. Memories, sensations, feelings that were not his own. He saw glimpses of a childhood spent in the shadow of a great throne. Zilara's memories. He felt her loneliness, her burden of responsibility, the pressure of being a princess of a dying empire. Zilara gasped, her eyes wide. She saw Ethan's memories too. The harsh training of a human soldier, the struggle to survive, the pain of losing comrades, the deep, unbreakable spirit that kept him going. Their minds were colliding, merging, weaving together like threads of a single fate. And then, silence. The glow faded. The shaking stopped. Ethan opened his eyes, breath heavy. Something had changed. He felt Zilara's presence inside him, not as a voice, but as a quiet, steady pulse in the back of his mind. A connection. Zilara gritted her teeth, clutching her head. This is impossible, she whispered. Chancellor Voris nodded approvingly. The bond has been formed. It is done. But Ethan knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. After the ritual, a new reality. Hours later, Ethan sat alone in his assigned chamber. His heart still pounded from the experience. He had trained for war, fought in brutal battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. He could sense Silara's emotions, not words, not thoughts, but faint impressions. When she was angry, he felt the heat of it. When she was calm, it soothed him. And right now, he felt her frustration. The door swung open. Silara stepped inside, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Ethan leaned back, smirking. "Didn't think you'd be the type to do post-bonding small talk." She ignored his sarcasm. "This connection. I can feel you." Her expression darkened. "And you can feel me." He nodded. "Yeah, it's weird. Not gonna lie." She took a deep breath. This should not have worked. No Zephyrin has ever bonded with another species before. Ethan studied her, and yet here we are. Silara hesitated, her gaze unreadable. "I need to know, human, why did you agree to this?" Ethan exhaled. He had asked himself the same question. "I guess I wanted to prove something." He leaned forward. "Your people think humans are reckless, emotional, unstable. Maybe we are, but we're also survivors. We fight, we adapt, we endure." He met her eyes. "If this bond can change something, end this war, then it's worth the risk." Silara stared at him, as if searching for deception, but there was none. She sighed. "I was raised to believe humans were nothing more than a violent species, but now," she shook her head, "now I feel what you feel, and I don't know what to think anymore." Ethan chuckled. "Guess we'll figure it out together." For the first time, Silara didn't argue. The war between their people still loomed over them, but something had shifted. A bond had been formed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan lay awake in his chamber, staring at the ceiling. It had been hours since the ritual, but he still felt its effects. His body had adjusted, but his mind was different now. He could sense Silara, not as a voice, not as thoughts, but as a presence in the back of his mind. He could feel her emotions, like faint echoes of something distant yet strangely familiar. Right now, she felt uneasy, conflicted. He sighed and sat up. "I don't think I'll ever get used to this." At that moment, the door slid open. Silara stood there, arms crossed, looking at him with those piercing golden eyes. "We need to talk," she said firmly. Ethan smirked. "That's what you said last time. You really like deep conversations." She ignored his sarcasm. "Something is happening to me, human, and I know it's happening to you too." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, no kidding. I can feel you, and I know you can feel me." He gestured toward her. "So tell me, princess, how does it feel to be stuck with a human inside your head?" Silara clenched her fists. "This is not a joke. The bond should not have worked between us, but it did. And now I can feel things. Things I should not be feeling." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She hesitated. "Your emotions, your memories, your thoughts." Ethan frowned. "You can read my mind." "No," she corrected, "not directly. But I get glimpses, flashes of what you've experienced. And sometimes I feel what you feel." Ethan leaned back. "So we're sharing more than just a bond. We're sharing ourselves." Silara nodded. "And that is dangerous." He studied her carefully. She was tense, conflicted, but there was something else underneath. Fear. "You're scared," he said. Silara's eyes flashed. "I am a warrior of the Zephyrin Empire. I do not fear anything." Ethan smirked. "Yeah. Then why are your hands shaking?" She looked down at her hands, noticing the faint tremble in her fingers. She quickly clenched them into fists. "This is wrong," she muttered. "I was raised to believe that humans are reckless, impulsive, and weak." She looked at him. "But now, I don't know what to believe." Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the point of all this. Maybe we were never supposed to see each other as enemies." She was silent for a long moment. Then she turned toward the door. "The High Council is expecting us tomorrow. They will test our bond. Be ready." Then she left, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The trial of the bond. The next morning, Ethan and Silara were led into the Chamber of Truth, an ancient hall with towering stone pillars and an open ceiling, where the twin suns cast shifting shadows on the floor. The High Council sat in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable. Chancellor Vorus stood at the center, his sharp eyes studying them carefully. "You have bonded, but the bond is only the beginning," Vorus announced. "Now you must be tested." Ethan crossed his arms. "Tested how?" Vorus gestured, and a holographic combat simulator activated around them. A massive armored Xyphoran warrior materialized in front of them, holding a long energy spear. Silara's eyes narrowed. "A combat test." Vorus nodded. "You must fight as one. If your bond is true, you will move as a single force. If not, you will fail." Ethan cracked his knuckles. "All right, let's see what this bond can do." The warrior charged. Ethan and Silara moved at the same time, their bodies reacting instinctively. Silara ducked low, her movements precise, and Ethan stepped in behind her, catching the warrior off guard. They were moving in sync, not thinking, just acting. Ethan felt it. Her instincts, her speed. It was like his body knew what she was going to do before she did it. Silara spun, kicking the warrior's weapon aside, and Ethan followed up with a quick strike to the chest. The warrior staggered back. The council watched in silent shock. The bond was real. The warrior attacked again, faster this time. Ethan dodged just in time, feeling Silara's warning in his mind before she even spoke. She leaped onto the warrior's shoulders, flipping over him while Ethan landed a precise punch to the back of his head. The warrior collapsed. Silence. Then Vorus stepped forward. Enough. The simulation ended. The warrior disappeared. The council members exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Vorus nodded slowly. The bond is true. Silara and Ethan exchanged a look. This was real. Whatever had happened between them during the ritual, it was more than just a ceremony. It was powerful. A new path. After the trial, Silara and Ethan were taken to the council's private chamber. Vorus studied them for a long moment. Then he spoke. "The war between our people has lasted too long," he said, "but this bond changes everything." Silara stiffened. "What are you saying?" Vorus sighed. "The council has decided. You two will serve as envoys between our species, a living symbol of what is possible." Ethan blinked. "Wait, you want us to be diplomats now?" Silara frowned. "I am a warrior, not a messenger." Vorus's gaze hardened. "You are both more than what you were before. The bond has made you something new, something greater." Ethan and Silara exchanged glances. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had wanted this. But now, their fates were bound together, and the future of two species rested in their hands. Ethan and Silara walked side by side through the grand halls of the Xyphoran High Council. The walls shimmered with intricate carvings, glowing faintly with energy from the planet's core. Despite their recent victory in the combat trial, tension lingered between them. Silara's mind raced with questions. How had the bond worked so perfectly? She had trained with Xyphoran warriors her entire life, but never had she moved so instinctively with another person, and certainly never with a human. She glanced at Ethan. He seemed calm, but she could feel his emotions flickering beneath the surface. Curiosity, determination, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Are you always this quiet?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Silara sighed. "I am thinking." "About what?" She hesitated. "The council's decision. They want us to be envoys, symbols of peace between our species." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, you don't sound too excited about it." "I am a warrior, Ethan," she said firmly, "not a politician." Ethan smirked. "Well, I'm an engineer, not a fighter. And yet here we are." She frowned. You adapted quickly during the trial. He shrugged. Maybe the bond helped. Maybe I'm just that good. Silara rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress the small smile that formed on her lips. But before the conversation could continue, a sharp voice interrupted them. You two were not supposed to succeed. They turned to see a tall Xiferan warrior, his golden armor polished to perfection. His piercing eyes locked onto Silara with unmistakable disapproval. Commander Valric, Silara said, standing straighter. Ethan immediately sensed her tension. Whoever this was, she respected him, but also feared him. Valric's gaze shifted to Ethan. So this is the human who has tangled our traditions. His voice dripped with disdain. Ethan crossed his arms. Nice to meet you too. Valric ignored him and looked back at Silara. You were one of our finest, a warrior without equal. And now, because of some strange accident, you are expected to stand beside this outsider as an equal. Silara clenched her fists. It was no accident, Commander. The bond is real. Valric's eyes narrowed. That is what concerns me. Ethan frowned. Let me guess, you don't trust humans. Valric stepped closer. I do not trust weakness. His gaze locked onto Ethan's. And I do not trust something that should not be possible. Ethan met his stare without flinching. Well, I hate to break it to you, but it is possible. And whether you like it or not, Silara and I are stuck with this bond. Valric studied him for a moment before turning back to Silara. Do not forget where you came from, Silara. Do not let this connection change you. Then, without another word, he walked away. Silara let out a slow breath. Ethan watched her carefully. You okay? She nodded, though her expression remained tense. Commander Valric was my mentor. He trained me to be a warrior. And now he thinks you're betraying that. She sighed. He believes strength comes only from tradition, that our ways must never change. He fears that this bond will make me different. Ethan smirked. Well, he's not wrong. It is going to change you. It's going to change both of us. Silara looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, was that such a bad thing? An unexpected threat? That night, Silara couldn't sleep. The events of the day replayed in her mind, the trial, the council's decision, Valric's warning. She had spent her whole life following the path of a warrior, but now that path had shifted in ways she couldn't control. Sighing, she decided to take a walk. She stepped into the dimly lit corridors of the palace, her thoughts swirling. But then, a sound, a faint whisper of movement. Silara spun around, her instincts flaring. The corridor was empty, but she knew better than to ignore her senses. Suddenly, a shadow lunged at her. She reacted instantly, dodging the attack and drawing her blade. Her attacker was cloaked in darkness, moving with deadly precision. Another strike. She barely blocked it in time. Whoever this was, they were trained, and they wanted her dead. But before the next strike could land, Ethan appeared. He tackled the assassin, knocking them off balance. Really? An ambush. Not very honorable, he muttered. Silara didn't hesitate. She struck, her blade finding its mark. The attacker collapsed, their hood falling away to reveal the Xiferan face. Ethan stared. Wait, you were attacked by your own people. Silara's eyes darkened. Not my people. Valric's followers. Ethan sighed. Great. So now we've got enemies on both sides. She looked down at the unconscious attacker, then at Ethan. We need to move. If there was one, there will be more. Ethan nodded. Right. And I'm guessing this means the whole peace envoy thing isn't going to be easy. Silara smirked. Nothing worth doing ever is. And together, they disappeared into the shadows, knowing that their journey had just become far more dangerous than either of them had expected. Silara and Ethan moved swiftly through the palace corridors, their footsteps silent against the polished floor. The attack had changed everything. It was no longer just about proving their bond. It was about survival. Silara's heart pounded with anger. She had known Valric would disapprove of the council's decision, but she never expected him to send assassins. It was an act of betrayal, not just against her, but against the Zypheran honor code. Ethan kept pace beside her, his mind racing. "We need to tell the council," he said in a low voice. Silara shook her head. "We have no proof. The assassin is unconscious, but Valric will deny everything. And if we accuse him without evidence, it will make us look weak." Ethan exhaled sharply. "So what's the plan?" She clenched her fists. "We find proof, and we stop him before he can strike again." A dangerous meeting. The palace was vast, but Silara knew exactly where to go. She led Ethan through a series of hidden passageways, known only to the royal guard. After a few minutes, they reached a secluded chamber, a secret observation room that overlooked Valric's personal quarters. Silara activated the energy screen, a one-way viewing panel that allowed them to see and hear everything inside. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Spying. I thought that wasn't the honorable thing to do." Silara gave him a sharp look. Honor does not mean ignorance. Inside the chamber, Valric stood with 3 other high-ranking Zypheran warriors. Their conversation was exactly what Silara feared. "The council is blind," Valric said, his voice filled with disdain. "They believe this bond is a sign of unity, but I see it for what it truly is, a threat to our way of life." One of the warriors nodded. "You are right, Commander. This human does not belong among us. Silara should have been the future of our warriors, but now she is tainted by an outsider." Ethan tensed, but Silara motioned for him to stay silent. Another warrior spoke. "The council will not change its decision." Valric's eyes narrowed. "Then we will change it for them. The bond must be broken. And if that means eliminating the human, so be it." Ethan's hands curled into fists, but Silara placed a firm grip on his arm. Her expression was cold, calculating. "We have what we need," she whispered. "Let's go." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. They slipped away before they were detected. Escape and strategy. Back in Silara's personal chambers, Ethan paced restlessly. "So, they're planning to kill me. Great." Silara was deep in thought. "Not just you. They want to break the bond. They see it as a weakness." Ethan exhaled. "You don't think that, do you?" She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "No, I do not." A moment of silence passed. Then Ethan smirked. "Well, that's good to hear." Silara's lips twitched, but the seriousness of the situation remained. "We must act quickly," she said. "Valric is powerful. Many in the military respect him. If we confront him in public, he will twist the truth." Ethan nodded. "So we need to make him expose himself. Show the council what he's planning." Silara's eyes gleamed. "Exactly." Setting the trap. The next morning, Silara and Ethan went before the council, acting as if nothing was wrong. The elders sat on their grand thrones, overlooking the two as they prepared for a ceremonial announcement. As expected, Valric and his supporters stood among the crowd, watching. Ethan took a deep breath and spoke loudly. "Honored council, I have a request." The council leader, an elder Zypheran named Sereth, tilted his head. "Speak, human." Ethan turned to Silara. "Since Silara and I are now bonded, I wish to challenge those who doubt it. A combat trial. One against many." Murmurs spread across the chamber. Silara looked at Ethan sharply, but he gave her a slight nod. Sereth considered the request. "An unusual challenge, but it is within our laws. If you succeed, it will prove your strength. If you fail, the bond will be seen as a weakness." Ethan smiled. "Then I better not fail." Silara realized what he was doing. This was the trap. Valric would never allow Ethan to win. He would interfere. And when he did, the council would see his treachery. Valric stepped forward. I accept this challenge on behalf of those who still honor our traditions." Silura smirked. "Then it is settled. The coming battle." As Ethan and Silura left the chamber, she turned to him. "That was reckless." Ethan grinned. "But it worked, didn't it?" She sighed. "Do you even know how to fight multiple trained warriors?" He shrugged. "Nope. But that's why I've got you." Silura rolled her eyes. "You better not die." Ethan chuckled. "Was that concern I just heard?" She shook her head. "Let's just make sure this plan works." As they walked toward the training grounds, both knew this fight would change everything. The training grounds of the Sci-Fi Palace were vast and unforgiving, a perfect stage for battle. Stone pillars lined the area, casting long shadows under the twin suns. The entire court had gathered, waiting in anticipation. Silura stood beside Ethan, her arms crossed. "You still have time to back out." Ethan smirked. "If I back out now, your people will never respect me." She sighed. "I know. That's what worries me." Across the arena, Valric watched with a cold smile. He had handpicked the warriors who would fight Ethan, elite Sci-Fi soldiers, trained for years in combat. Ethan's opponents stepped forward, 4 towering Sci-Fi warriors, each stronger and faster than any human. The council elder, Sereth, raised his hand. "This is a test of strength and spirit. The human, Ethan, will face multiple warriors. He may surrender at any time. If he wins, his bond with Silura will be honored. If he loses, the bond will be questioned." Ethan clenched his fists. "No pressure, huh?" Silura placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay focused. I can't fight for you, but I can give you an advantage." She handed him a Zephyrin combat gauntlet, a device designed to enhance grip and strength. Ethan slid it on, feeling a surge of energy pulse through his arm. Valric narrowed his eyes. "That is against tradition." Sereth shook his head. "The warriors wear their armor. The human may wear the gauntlet. The trial must be fair." Ethan grinned. "I like this guy." Sereth stepped back and raised his hand. "Begin." The battle begins. The first warrior lunged. He was fast, too fast. Ethan barely dodged as a fist came swinging toward his head. He rolled to the side, but another warrior kicked him in the ribs, sending him sprawling. Pain shot through his body, but Ethan forced himself up. "Okay, maybe I should have trained for this." The warriors didn't wait. The second fighter attacked, swinging a heavy staff at Ethan's legs. This time, Ethan used the gauntlet. He caught the staff midair and yanked it forward, pulling the warrior off balance. Then, with a surge of strength, he flipped the staff around and slammed it into his opponent's chest. The warrior stumbled back, stunned. The crowd murmured in surprise. Ethan didn't stop. He turned just in time to dodge another punch and countered with a swift strike to the ribs. His movements were slower than theirs, but he used their speed against them. Silura watched closely. She knew he couldn't win through raw power. He needed to be smarter. Valric frowned, arms crossed. This wasn't how he expected things to go. Ethan's strategy. Ethan ducked under another swing, using the pillars as cover. He forced the warriors to chase him, making them swing wildly and miss. When one of them overextended, Ethan struck, landing a precise punch that sent the warrior crashing into the ground. The crowd gasped. Silura smiled. "He's learning." Ethan panted, sweat dripping from his forehead. 2 warriors were still standing, circling him like predators. Then, suddenly, one charge. Ethan braced himself until the warrior collapsed mid-step. Silura's eyes widened. Poison. She turned sharply. Valric's smile had returned. "This is not a fair fight," she muttered. Ethan saw the warrior struggling, his breath ragged. He had been drugged. But why? Then he realized. Valric didn't care about honor. He wanted chaos. The crowd grew restless. Some warriors stepped forward in concern. Sereth raised his voice. "This battle must remain honorable." But Valric acted first. "This human has brought dishonor. He has used tricks. We cannot let this continue." His loyal soldiers rushed the arena. The ambush. Silara reacted instantly. She leaped into the ring, blocking Valric's men. "You dishonor the trial, Valric," she shouted. Valric sneered. "I do what must be done." Ethan, still catching his breath, realized the real fight had just begun. He grabbed a fallen warrior's staff and turned to face the incoming soldiers. The audience erupted in confusion. Some warriors joined Silara and Ethan, standing against Valric's betrayal. Others hesitated, unsure who to trust. Ethan tightened his grip on the staff. "Guess we're not doing rules anymore." Silara smirked. "We never were." The turning point. A fierce battle broke out in the arena. Ethan dodged attacks, using his gauntlet and staff to counter. Silara fought beside him, her movements swift and precise. Valric, realizing he was losing control, shouted, "Seize them both. They are traitors." But the council had seen enough. Sereth's voice boomed across the arena. Enough. A shockwave from his royal insignia pulsed through the air, freezing everyone in place. The fighting stopped. Sereth stepped forward, his gaze locked on Valric. "You have defied the honor of this trial. You have poisoned your own warriors, and you have attempted to take control by force." Valric's expression twisted with rage. "I did what was necessary." Sereth's eyes darkened. "No, you did what was selfish." He turned to the assembled warriors. "This trial was meant to prove strength, but it has revealed betrayal. And now, Valric must answer for his actions." The guard stepped forward, seizing Valric. He struggled, but even he knew his time was over. Silara exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. She looked at Ethan, who was bruised but grinning. "Well," he said, "that was fun." She rolled her eyes. "You almost died." "Yeah," he admitted, "but I didn't." She shook her head, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. The bond had been tested, and it had proven its strength. The grand hall of the Sci-Fi palace was silent. The air was thick with tension as the council gathered to deliver their judgment. Valric, now shackled, knelt before them, his once proud expression replaced by quiet rage. Ethan and Silara stood side by side, bruised but victorious. Sereth, the elder, rose from his seat. His deep voice echoed through the hall. "Valric, you have dishonored our traditions, poisoned your own warriors, and attempted to seize power through deceit." He paused, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "For this, you are stripped of your title and exiled from Sci-Fi lands." A murmur spread through the chamber. Exile was a fate worse than death for a Sci-Fi warrior. Valric's fists clenched. "You are making a mistake." His voice was low, venomous. "The council is weak. That human," he spat the word like an insult, "has tainted our ways. You will regret this." Sereth remained firm. "Enough." He gestured to the guards. "Take him away." The guards pulled Valric to his feet. He didn't struggle, but before he was let out, he turned his glare toward Ethan. "This isn't over." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "No," he said, "it is." With that, Valric was dragged away. A hard-won victory. As soon as Valric was gone, the tension in the room eased. Some warriors still looked uncertain, their gazes flickering between Ethan and Silara. One of the older warriors stepped forward. "The trial was meant to prove his strength," he said, gesturing toward Ethan. And it did. He looked at Silara. But more than that, it proved his heart. Ethan blinked. "Ah, thanks." The warrior gave a slight nod of respect. "You fought with honor. You did not cheat, even when Valric did. And you stood beside our princess in battle." Another warrior stepped forward. "That is what it means to be Zephyrin." Slowly, the others followed, one by one, bowing their heads in recognition. Silara smiled. You've earned their respect. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. That was way too much effort just to prove I like you. Silura smirked. Well, you did more than that. Sirith raised his hand, and the hall fell silent again. Ethan of Earth, he announced. Your bond with Silura is recognized. You are now an honored guest of Zephora, and a warrior in our eyes. The crowd cheered. Ethan scratched the back of his head. Wow, that's kind of a big deal, huh? Silura chuckled. You have no idea. The final decision. Later that night, Ethan and Silura stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the glowing city. So, Ethan said, what now? Silura folded her arms, awful. That depends. You could return to Earth, if you wanted. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And leave after all that? Not a chance. She glanced at him, surprised. You're serious? He nodded. I mean, I kind of like it here. The giant aliens trying to kill me. Not so much. But you make it worth it. Silura's gaze softened. You are strange, Ethan. Yeah, I get that a lot. He grinned. She hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. I don't know what the future holds. But I know this. I don't want to face it alone. Ethan turned to her, his expression serious for once. Neither do I. She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. In that moment, it didn't matter that they were from different worlds. They had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered.